Everyone assumes the United States is the undisputed ruler of North America, the military giant, the economic engine, the political center of gravity. But what if that's all just surface level? Because the deeper you look, the more one quiet truth emerges. America doesn't control its own survival. Canada does. The power grids that light up US cities, fueled by Canadian dams, the oil that keeps America moving, pumped from Canadian soil, the fresh water that feeds its people, the Arctic routes that define its security, the minerals that power its military tech, all traced back to one country, and it's not the one you think. This isn't just a geographic coincidence, it's a strategic chokehold. And the moment Canada decides to close its fist, America won't need an enemy. It'll collapse under its own dependence. So don't blink, because in the next few minutes, you'll see how the world's friendliest neighbor might just be holding the superpower hostage. Most people think power comes from oil, missiles, or money. But in reality, the most overlooked weapon on the continent is water. And Canada controls more of it than anyone else on Earth, nearly 20% of the world's fresh water. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not just about how much Canada has, it's about where it goes. Because that water isn't locked away behind borders. It flows straight into the United States. The Great Lakes, the largest freshwater system on the planet, may sit on both sides of the border, but the flow is Canadian. Rivers like the Niagara, the Detroit, the St. Lawrence Seaway, all run through Canadian terrain before they ever touch US soil. And more than 40 million Americans depend on them for drinking, for farming, for power. So here's the loop that no one sees coming. What if Canada decides to regulate that flow? Not out of malice, just policy. Suddenly the taps slow, power grids strain, crops wither from Michigan to New York. And just like that, the richest country on Earth is parched by a neighbor it never thought to fear. We measure power in volts, barrels, and megawatts. And by those standards, Canada holds America in the palm of its hand. Every single day, over 4 million barrels of oil flow from Canada into the United States. That's not a trade, that's an addiction. One so deep, Canada now supplies more than half of all US oil imports. And it all travels through fragile lifelines like Enbridge Line 5, threading through Canadian territory. Pipelines the US doesn't own, doesn't control, but desperately needs. Now imagine this. One shut-off valve in Ottawa, one policy shift. Gas prices skyrocket, refineries stall, the American heartland grinds to a halt. But oil? That's only chapter 1. Because hydroelectric power generated in Quebec and Manitoba flows just as quietly and just as critically into US cities like New York, Vermont, and Minnesota. Canada's dams don't just light up the north, they prop up the US grid. And here's the question no one's asking. What if Canada decides to keep that power for itself? That conversation is already happening. Right now, Canadian leaders are weighing energy security at home and rethinking how much should flow south. It would take just one national policy change for US neighborhoods to go dark. And the lights wouldn't flicker because of a storm or a war. They'd flicker because America relied too heavily on the neighbor it thought would never say no. When the ice melts, power shifts. And right now, as the Arctic opens faster than anyone predicted, the world isn't just watching, it's racing. New shipping lanes, untapped oil, critical resources. Everyone assumes the US will lead this Arctic future. But here's what they miss. Canada controls the front door. The legendary Northwest Passage, a shortcut between Asia and Europe, runs straight through Canadian waters. And Canada doesn't just patrol it, it claims full sovereignty under international law. The United States disagrees, on paper. But disagreement doesn't equal access. Because without Canadian cooperation, America is locked out. And while Washington argues legalities, Russia is building military bases in the Arctic, and China is quietly sending research vessels into the region. Meanwhile, Canada, often seen as neutral, passive, polite, is transforming into something else entirely. A gatekeeper to the new Cold War. But the Arctic is just the beginning, because beneath that thawing ground lies something even more valuable than shipping lanes or oil. Critical minerals. And once again, Canada's sitting on the jackpot. While headlines scream about China's grip on rare earths, another power is quietly stockpiling the future. And it's not across the Pacific, it's just across the northern border. Canada sits on a critical mineral gold mine. Lithium in Quebec, nickel in Ontario, cobalt and graphite buried deep within the Canadian shield. These aren't just raw materials. They're the core components of everything modern warfare and industry runs on. From EV batteries to hypersonic missiles, from AI chips to satellites and stealth drones. And while the US scrambles to build a domestic supply chain wrapped in red tape, lawsuits, and environmental battles, Canada already has the geology, the infrastructure, and the green lights to extract and export. Now here's the scenario no one's talking about. What if Canada doesn't export to the US? What if it cuts a better deal with China? Suddenly the Pentagon's defense systems stall. Tech giants miss production deadlines. The US military can't build its next-generation arsenal, not for lack of innovation, but for lack of materials. And all it would take is one trade agreement, one signature, and the US loses the next war before it even begins. Now picture this. A new Canadian government steps into power. Not hostile, not aggressive, but tired. Tired of US demands, tempted by better deals from Beijing, and then it begins. Oil shipments slow to a crawl. Freshwater flow becomes reassessed. Arctic collaboration is put under review. And those critical minerals, they're shipped east, not south. No threats, no sanctions, no missiles in the air. But deep inside the US, something starts to break. Refineries go idle, crops dry up, power grids flicker, factories stall. Warplanes are grounded, not by an enemy, but by an empty supply line. There's no invasion, no war, just a quiet, calculated rebalancing of control, because this was never about diplomacy. It's about something older, more permanent, geography. And while the US built aircraft carriers and bases around the world, it forgot one thing: Canada has been holding the high ground all along. And now, it's learning how to use it. Here's the part no one dares to say out loud. Canada holds the levers to North America's survival, and it's no longer the quiet passenger in the back seat. Energy contracts being renegotiated, rare earth mining scaling fast, Arctic sovereignty not just claimed but actively enforced. The old story, where the US led and Canada followed, is fading. In its place, something far less predictable, something volatile. So the next time someone laughs and calls Canada a land of moose, maple syrup, and manners, tell them this: that friendly neighbor is the gatekeeper of the US power grid, its fuel lines, its water supply, and its tech infrastructure. And the moment it decides to stop playing nice, the continent rewrites itself. Overnight. If this shook your perspective, even a little, then hit like, tap subscribe, and smash the bell icon. Because this isn't a one-time twist. The next power shift isn't coming. It's already in motion, and most people still don't see it.